Yo, what's going on guys, and welcome back to the Program Explained series. If you didn't already know, this is going to be the last installment of our 6-day per week upper-lower program that we've been covering in this series thus far. So without further delay, let's jump right into the video, starting with the first exercise, which is once again the barbell bench press. Now for today's workout, the bench press is going to be an optional exercise given that we already hit it twice this week for a total of 7 working sets. And the science seems to point towards this already theoretically being enough specificity to yield most, if not all, possible strength adaptations from 1-to-1 movement specificity. However, in my experience, for some trainees, including myself, benching for a frequency of up to 3 times per week still yields better strength benefits when compared to 2 times per week at almost no additional fatigue cost. So if you feel a third bench day isn't too fatiguing, you can of course test this out on yourself and see what bench frequency leads to the best results for you. Now, again, since it's our third bench session this week, I actually take a different range of motion and tempo approach in an attempt to build more explosive strength. So for this workout, I focus mainly on moving explosively in the bottom portion of the range of motion, given that the scientific literature indicates that the stretch position seems to be the best position to perform for hypertrophy, as well as the fact that this portion of the lift is where I usually get stuck when attempting a PR. Quick aside, for more information on the nuanced science of range of motion, I highly recommend you check out my latest Science Explained video on the topic. It's easily one of the most comprehensive videos on the topic with very simple heuristics on how to actually apply the research to your training. So moving on to our second exercise, I programmed a heavy barbell biceps curl. Now this exercise is actually quite rare to find in any programs, given that for hypertrophy it's just as good as a biceps curl in a higher 6 to 12 rep range, and most people don't really care about building biceps curl strength. However, since I'm a big fan of biceps curl strength and there's honestly zero downside to including it, I of course thought including it was a no-brainer. And if I'm being completely honest here, I'm sure all of us wish we can be the only guy in the gym capable of curling 135 for reps. Anyways, I digress. The cues for this movement are pretty simple. You'll want to make sure that your form is relatively strict, since you of course don't want to use momentum and cheat the entire lift. Not only that, ego lifting is dangerous, especially for the biceps, since bicep tears are super common. So I of course must mention that you should be doing this movement safely and mindfully. Other than that, I personally recommend using a eccentric accentuated tempo for the lift, meaning you can curl as usual, however, focus on fighting the negative after each rep, given that you're significantly stronger during eccentrics. Which leads us on to our third exercise, a dumbbell or barbell shoulder press. Now, if your main focus for shoulder movements in this program is hypertrophy, I recommend using a seated dumbbell shoulder press or even a seated Smith machine shoulder press. Not only that, I'd also recommend using a higher rep range, somewhere between 6 to 12, focusing hard on the lengthened position of the lift. This means that you should not stop at or within the top half of the range of motion. This is a very, very common misconception, and if we're being honest, it's probably why your shoulders are so small. And since we already covered how you should do this exercise to maximize hypertrophic stimulus, I'd also like to mention that if, like me, your shoulders are already massive and you don't really need the additional 3 sets of shoulder work, you may instead focus on building barbell overhead press strength in the 3 to 5 rep range. Now, don't forget, even if you do barbell overhead presses in the 3 to 5 rep range, you will still be getting a pretty strong hypertrophic stimulus. It just won't be as optimal as if you were to do what I previously mentioned. Now, regardless of whether your goal is hypertrophy or strength, you will of course want to focus on limiting any momentum when performing the lift, as well as you will want to explosively contract for each rep and perform a slow and controlled eccentric before pausing in the stretch position for a few seconds and repeating. Not only that, you may optionally add long muscle length partials after reaching failure, or even just completely skip the lockout of the movement, given that the lockout on a shoulder press is mainly handled by the triceps. So moving on to our fourth exercise, we have a cable upper lat bias row. For this exercise, you may either use a chest supported row for better stabilization or just use a regular seated cable row. However, the extra stabilization may help with achieving better hypertrophy outcomes, given that it allows you to focus solely on your lats. You'll also want to use a neutral grip with a close grip width in order to bias the lats, as well as pull from 45 degrees of shoulder flexion in order to hopefully bias the upper lats. And as usual, you'll want to accentuate the stretch position by holding in it for a few seconds, then following it with an explosive concentric, and optionally holding in the contracted position to focus on the mind-muscle connection of the lats, and end with a slow and controlled eccentric before repeating. Now, onto our fifth exercise, we have a superset of cable front raises and cable side raises. Now, if you have extra time, you can optionally split this superset up into two separate exercises to get better focus on both your front and side delts, which is typically what I do since I'm not really limited on time in the gym. Other than that, the exercise cues are pretty simple. For the front raise, you'll want to set the cable up to right below knee height. Then you'll want to step forward so your arm is behind your body, hopefully putting the front delt into a deeper stretch than if your arm was just next to your torso. Not only that, you'll want to have your arm flared out in order to actually pull in the same direction that your front delt fibers run, which is diagonally. Lastly, when you fully contract, you'll want to make sure your arm actually crosses your midline, hopefully putting your front delts through a very strong contraction. Now, as for the side raise cues, they're pretty much the same as the front raise cues. You'll generally want to keep the cable at just below knee height, step away from the cable in order to hopefully get a deep side delt stretch, and pull in the direction that your side delt fibers run. And for both, you will of course want to use my typical stretch position and eccentric accentuated tempo, which leads us on to our sixth exercise, a biceps curl supersetted with a rear delt fly. Now, in this program, I have a cable curl supersetted with a cable rear delt fly since they both use the same machine. However, you may also do a seated dumbbell curl supersetted with a dumbbell lying rear delt fly. Regardless of what you decide on, the main focus should be to work on whichever biceps head is most lagging for you, which for me is the outer head. Therefore, I perform a seated dumbbell curl with my arms flared outward with an attempt to focus on the biceps long head. For more information on how to focus on different heads of the biceps, or if you just want to learn what the literature says about arm training, I recommend you check out my arm training science explained video. Now, since I don't personally enjoy doing a dumbbell rear delt fly, I actually split this superset up and do a cable rear delt fly after all my curls, since it's my personal favorite rear delt fly variation. Now, the general rear delt cues are to pull with your arms abducted from your torso around 45 degrees, since this should line up with your rear delt muscle fibers line of pull. You'll also generally want to use a rear delt fly variation that allows you to bring your arms back across your midline, hopefully putting your rear delt into a deep stretch, as well as you'll obviously want to select a variation that actually applies tension in the stretch position. For those reasons, I typically always recommend a cable crossover rear delt fly. So now onto our seventh exercise, I programmed a cable face pull with external rotation. For this exercise, you'll want to pull with your arms abducted about 45 degrees from your torso and focus on using your mid traps and rear delts to perform this portion of the movement. Once you pull the cable in, you'll want to shrug with your upper traps and externally rotate. If done properly, this exercise should work on pretty much your entire upper back. Lastly, you'll of course want to use my usual tempo with an emphasis on the stretch position and the eccentric phase of the lift, which brings us onto our eighth exercise, a standing dumbbell cross body curl. This curl is just like any other curl. However, I do recommend that you focus on bringing your arms in tight towards your torso with every rep. This should hopefully bias both the short head of the biceps as well as the coracobrachialis. Optionally, you may also do a hammer curl grip and grip very tight in order to focus on your brachialis and brachioradialis. This, however, will pull some attention away from your biceps, so just keep that in mind when deciding on your grip. Now, for our last exercise, we have a dumbbell monkey shrug or cable monkey shrug. The general cues for this movement are to flex your neck or look down when you're in the stretch position, since your traps are also connected to your neck. Then, when in the contracted position, look up at the ceiling to hopefully get a stronger contraction on the traps. You also might want to bend over slightly in order to get a better trap stretch, allowing your shoulder blades to round forward. And lastly, since it's a monkey shrug, you'll want to flare your arms away from your torso in order to contract diagonally with each rep, which should more closely mimic the line of pull of your upper traps muscle fibers. And with that, I'd like to thank you all so much for making it this far into the video. If you liked the video and would like to see more practical information like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Not only that, if you have any comments or feedback, don't be shy to leave a comment below, since I really enjoy reading your guys' comments and I try to reply to as many as possible. Lastly, if you found the information in this video useful, feel free to share it with someone else who might also find it useful, as this will greatly help the growth of my channel. And with that, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll be seeing you guys next time. Peace.